Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible episode for you guys today. So I hope you're tuned in, you sit back and enjoy the episode, and you're probably going to listen to this episode on your commute home because, of course, the real Greer heads are listening to this at its 5 p.m. premiere every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I know the true Greer heads are doing that, and so should everyone who's listening to this. So we've got a few topics to cover today. It may be a shorter episode. Sometimes they say it's going to be a shorter episode, but then it turns out to be an extremely long episode. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a relatively briefer episode than our usual fare. So we'll jump right into that. This first story I want to talk about is there was a new New York Times poll put out last week that there were several different factors of it. It was a wide-ranging poll, but there was one significant part of it, or thing that I found very interesting, was the support that Democrats are getting. Axios highlighted this. A bunch of people on Twitter were highlighting this. And what it's being found is that Democrats have a greater level of support among white college graduates than they do among non-whites in general. Right now, they have an over 20-point advantage among college-educated whites. I believe it's 57% of college-educated whites say they plan to vote for Democrats in the midterms. And roughly 36% say that they are planning to vote Republican. Only 7% or so are, undecided. They haven't made up their minds yet. Among minorities now, for blacks, it's still an overwhelming advantage. I think only 3% are considering voting Republican. It's almost 80% are ready to vote Democrat. I don't think this is a demographic that, despite all the efforts, all the Brexit talk, they're still solidly Democrat. But what comes up interesting are Hispanics and the other category. Among Hispanics, Republicans currently enjoy a record-breaking level support of 38% among Hispanics. Only 41% are saying right now, as of July, are saying that they want to vote Democrat, and the rest are undecided. I believe it's 21%. And then for other, which I'm not even quite sure what is all in the other. I'm assuming that would include Asians and other group, maybe multiracials or people who just don't list their race. That is, Republicans actually have an advantage there. They have the plurality. They have 39% support compared to 34% support for Democrats. So these are pretty decent numbers for Republicans when they talk about non-white minority outreach. And they've been spending billions and billions of dollars, throughout the decades to do outreach to minorities. Maybe not billions. Actually, probably it is now. If you look at all the minority outreach over the 30, 40 years, it probably does amount into the billions that they've spent on this. And it's been mostly fruitless. But at this moment, they are finally making gains. And there was the Mayra Flores election in the southeast Texas, where a woman who, if you guys, most of you are familiar with this, I talked about this at the time. This happened last month, where a Republican won a majority Hispanic district. And it's not just like 50% Hispanic. It's like over 80% Hispanic. And she won it by almost 10 points. So this is like a big deal, that there is a pretty significant shift among Hispanics. And so a lot of people are celebrating this because they're saying this is proof that the GOP is now the party of the multiracial working class. That the GOP is now, hostile to the affluent white elites. And this is why they don't want to vote for the Republicans. They're now, having the Hispanics and Asians on their side. And Hispanics and Asians are tired of wokeness. And they just want to focus on the economy. And they want to revolt against the affluent white elite. And this is always talked about a lot of times. And so they always want, and conservatives, there is a point that like a lot of this stuff, a lot of the leftism and liberalism is driven by affluent whites. As you guys know, I popularized the term, didn't I? I will not say I coined it, but I will say I popularized the term awful affluent white female liberal as a major problem in American society. If you look at any of these issues, there's generally an awful, there are the awfuls are the primary army, advocating for these issues. There's a couple of other different groups, Of course, we also want to point out Indians are also a prominent part of that coalition as well, advocating for a lot of these policies and being like the people, in the leadership of this. So there's a lot of different groups, but everyone notes that like white liberals are pretty bad. And there's been all these polling on this showing over time that white liberals have gone gong-ho on all these social issues. They're like the only demographic group that has a loathing for their own racial group, or has a negative attitude towards their own racial group. Like pretty much every other demographic has like shockingly a positive, look at their own racial group, except for white liberals. They have an extremely negative view towards whites in general. They're huge fans of immigration. They think that there should be open borders. All these people were going crazy during George Floyd and, wanting to have a Black Lives Matter religion when that was occurring. Affluent white liberals are a major problem, particularly affluent white female liberals, the awfuls. But in some cases it's overstated, and especially in regards to the idea that every college-educated white is an awful. That is like a huge lib. They have those signs out front of their house and like saying, in this house we believe in science, Black Lives Matter, love is love, and Trump is a fascist. They have those signs out. They have Black Lives Matter signs. They have a Ukraine flag. They have the latest trendy liberal issue that they're displaying from their car and their home. And this is like really the impression that they have of all college-educated whites. But that's not necessarily the case. I would say that they're not as conservative as non-college educated whites, or working class whites. That's probably true as a regard. But the majority of them are not these like horrible libtards. A lot of them are these kind of squishy moderates. They do respond to what is perceived as respectable and what they want to look at. Are the issues that they respond to or gravitate towards, if they see that as like the cost of being a respectable citizen in our society, being a respectable middle class person, and they view like the extremes as just unrespectable and not something that they want to get into. That's fine. But they do have issues that do motivate them, that makes them change, or that they will, see reality. The deluded libtards are never going to see reality. They can be mugged, they can have a home invasion, they'll still have the Black Lives Matter sign out in their house. But that's not the majority of college-educated whites. Majority of college-educated whites, if they have a crime problem in their suburb, they want it to be fixed. Look at there's the area of Buckhead in Atlanta, which is a very affluent white liberal, or I wouldn't necessarily say liberal area, but it's a very affluent white area of Atlanta. And it's part of Atlanta. It used to be extremely nice, but now it's been having a major crime problem due to the permissive attitude of Democrats in the area, that they no longer want to enforce the law. And Buckhead is now having a lot of problems where, 10 years ago, they never had shootings, never really had home invasions, didn't really have a crime problem. Now they have all this problem. And so a lot of these people in Buckhead, most of them probably voted for Joe Biden. Most of them are not like diehard conservatives or wanting to secede from Atlanta because of the crime problem. They realize that the crime problem, they will recognize reality when it comes to them. They may be deluded in comfort when they don't have these problems to them, but when crime visits them, they will turn on demanding law and order. And it's the same with education. If they have their schools rejecting their kid because, if they're applying to like a top tier magnet school or whatever, or top tier private school or merit-based school in their area, and they're trying to get their kid in there, and the kid is rejected because of the color of their skin, and an unqualified minority is let in their place just for racial justice reasons, they do get upset about that. And we've seen that happen in Northern Virginia. We've seen that happen in California. Relatively liberal parents, and a lot of these are also Asian too, not just affluent whites. They get upset about that. And they also even get upset about the indoctrination that happens to their children. They get weirded out by a lot of these things that they want to teach their kids about, like, gender identity, anti-white racism. If their kid comes home and talks about how, like, crying and sobbing over the fact that their teacher tells them that they're evil because they're white, the average college-educated white is not going to say, oh, well, I agree with that. Check out our sign out front. In this house, we believe science is real and Black Lives Matter. the majority of them are not going to say that. Now, there's all these fruitcakes there who are into these ideas, but that's not the majority of them. The majority of them are kind of herd animals. They go along with the flow. They'll listen to CNN and stuff, and they'll get propagandized. But if reality comes home to them, and if they see these problems in their schools and in their neighborhood, they will adjust to reality and actually demand like a real solution to it. They're not going to be stuck in being a huge libtard if going along with this. So these people are normal, relatively normal. They do suffer the effects of living in modern America, where they're subject to so much propaganda. Whenever they turn on the TV, they got leftist ads. Whenever they try to watch a sports game, they get BLM propaganda. So these people just respond in kind. And for most people, they're not free thinkers like us. They just absorb what's around them and then follow along with the crowd. That's why. But they're not totally lost. They're not totally. You can't just totally say they're forsaken. We're not gonna try to reach them out. They're just a lost cause. Like that's not. I don't think that's really it. And it's also an important part to remember is that the minority support does not make up for losing college-educated whites for a couple different reasons. One is that minorities that is winning over are not enough to are even less than the percentage of the white college-educated voter demographic. College-educated whites, according to the New York Times poll, make up 26% of voters. Hispanics and others make up only 21%. So that's less of them. And also, there's a stronger advantage among college-educated whites versus minorities. Now, the one advantage that they have is over non-college educated whites, which are still 39% of the voter demographic, which I'm actually surprised by. But I guess that, there are so many boomers, silent generation, and maybe even Gen X where like going to college was not the norm for whites. And so they're still around, a lot of them are going to be around for a while. And they're still the majority of the white population at 39%. And Republicans do enjoy a significant advantage over them. They have a 30-point advantage over Democrats of support with them. I think Democrats are only getting like 23% support among non-college educated whites. I think it's 54% for Republicans, and the rest are undecided. So that is a important part to keep in mind. So it's, I don't want to say that the correct response is not to say this is awesome, like this is great that we're losing college educated whites. We're going to really conquer the world if we have, 90 or if we have just 38 to 40% of the Hispanic vote. No, that's not going to happen with elections. And there's also an important thing to remember is that losing college educated people in general, which there's like a massive disadvantage for Republicans in that category, just college educated in general. In that category, it's 56% versus 32% overall, and that includes whites, Asians, blacks, Hispanics, everyone who's college educated. They have a 24-point advantage over Republicans. And college grads are 35% of registered voters. So these are important things. And also, I think, college-educated voters are more likely to turn out in midterms versus non-college-educated white, unless there's a reason to get them out. I mean, Youngkin had a huge, massive turnout. Glenn Youngkin in Virginia last year had a massive turnout among these rural areas that were filled with non-college-educated whites. And they turned out, and this is one of the reasons that he won. And actually, Youngkin's actually an important thing, because when the Youngkin thing happened, they all credited the upsurge of support of non-whites, of Hispanics and Asians. That's what turned the tide for Youngkin. But in fact, Youngkin did worse among Hispanics and Asians than Trump did in 2020 in Virginia. And so that's a point that's not really brought up very often, is that he actually did worse among them. I think he did slightly better among blacks, but it was like insignificant. And the real thing that decided the election is that he won a greater share of the white vote. He won over 60% of the white vote, and it was due to winning back college-educated whites to his message. And how did he win them back? He won them back through attacking critical race theory, through attacking the lowering of the education standards. College-educated whites still think that. They may worry about how Trump is disreputable, that they're going to lose the respectability by supporting Trump and some of these conservative causes. They don't want to look like a right-wing extremist. But they're still willing to vote Republican if Democrats are acting so insane that they'll go to it. They just have to have an appealing message for them. And so he won due to the white vote. He got a higher percentage of the white vote than Trump in the state of Virginia. I think Trump only got 54 or 55% of the white vote in 2020. It's very low. It's not a good showing, but Youngkin then won a lot of that support back, and it was due to the white vote that he won, not due to the non-white vote. And that was the real. So he both got a higher turnout among rural whites, non-college educated whites, with a message about education, and he won back a lot of these white suburbanites, white college-educated suburbanites. So that's the message that's happening there. It was not a sign of the multiracial working class emerging. It was a sign of whites returning to Republican fold. But now whites are not, and you have to wonder, why is that happening? Why is there? Because it looked like and I've been saying this, it looks like there's going to be a Republican blowout in the midterms, and I kept repeating it, and the only thing I said would have been were maybe abortion and gun control, which the gun issue seems to be slipping from the headlines. I don't think that's really there. And even the New York Times thing, it said that, only a set number of voters, listed guns, immigration, and crime. I think it was like 4% in the New York Times poll listed that as their, these social issues is primarily economy. And Republicans do way better among those who are stating economy. But those who are saying social issues, Democrats are crushing Republicans, and that's why in this New York Times poll, Democrats surprisingly have a 1-point advantage over Republicans. Now, it's like 41-40%. There's a lot of undecideds out there. Now, that still could mean Republicans do well in the midterms because, maybe it's like these really heavily blue districts out in like California or Oregon, Washington, New York, the suburbs of New York City. They're never going to go Republican. Now those areas are even further blue. And so like these Democratic incumbents, instead of winning by 70%, they'll win by 80%. And so if you look at the at the midterm elections as a whole, it'll look like Democrats didn't do that poorly on popular vote. But when it came to like actual decisive races in the Senate and in the House, like these battleground districts, Republicans eked out victories. And so they could still gain a majority with that. But, the areas that are heavily blue just go even bluer. And that's what accounts for the disparity in popular vote. So that's one thing, but this is still pretty concerning, especially when, previous polls were showing, Republicans with possibly even like a 10-point advantage. And now it's like down to a 1-point advantage. So you might not have a blowout. And what is the cause? And it's actually, I've been disputing this too, but there is now starting to be a backlash towards the Roe v. Wade, or overturning Roe v. Wade and this abortion decision. They're registering higher support for abortion after the Supreme Court eliminated it. It went from 60% to 65% favor, keeping abortion legal. And there's also now a poll showing that, nearly 20% of Americans say that abortion is is one of their leading issues, one of their primary issues going in the midterms. And usually it's a very tiny percentage. Like I've looked at polls in the past, and it's usually like only 1 or 2%. And now it's, nearly 10 times that number. And, that does show, and that's not a sign so far that it's favoring Republicans. It's a sign that it's favoring Democrats. Now, and some of these, and I've been hearing anecdotes, friends who've like been talking to young women on this issue, and they've been trying to assess it, and they've talked to these women, and generally a lot of people who are just don't follow politics have like very schizophrenic, incoherent political views, and they'll just like have like one issue that they're on this and then another issue. Like they don't follow along necessarily with formal party lines. And they're talking about this, and he's like talking to some girl who and I've heard this a couple different women, and they've said that they've complained about the economy and gas prices, but they're also really hostile towards this Roe v. Wade decision. Now, some of this comes out in hostility towards Biden, And some of it comes out in hostility just toward, Republicans in general. So it's like all over the place. They blame Biden for this because, they feel that Biden could just stop the Supreme Court because, they're not very knowledgeable about politics, which he can't. Well, I mean, some people say that who are very knowledgeable about politics when they should know better. And so they're upset about this issue, and they would have probably not otherwise voted if, they got other things to do on a Tuesday. But now they may be more inclined to vote due to this one issue. And so there's now how much of that is going to be a factor come November, that's anyone's guess. But there could be a way where abortion could become the major issue. There was this case in Ohio where this illegal immigrant raped a 10-year-old girl, and the family crossed state lines because Ohio has a heartbeat bill and they don't grant exceptions. Past 6 weeks, they don't grant exceptions in the case of rape and incest. So they took this girl across state lines into Indiana, which you would think is more conservative state, and they did the abortion there, and they brought him back. And, Joe Biden has been highlighting this issue because clearly when people hear a case like that, and the exceptions, like people really do not like, abortion bans with no exceptions. Alabama passed a bill in, I think it was 2019, on abortion. And I think that's now a law because, of course, the Supreme Court, due to the Supreme Court decision. And in that bill, it said that, like total ban, no exceptions. And also, weirdly enough, there would be no penalty for the woman seeking abortion, but there'd be like 99 years in prison for an abortion doctor. And as I've argued before, that's like essentially saying to a woman who hires a hitman to kill her husband that there is no penalty for her, but the hitman gets a death penalty. And so that's like what but the pro-life movement is very into this. It's like, if you view abortion as a crime and you view an adult as having agency, maybe if it was like a 10-year-old girl, you could say like maybe she was pressured into it by her parents, she doesn't, she's not a full adult. I could see like, you not charging like an adult with that, like depending on the situation. But if it's like an adult, if it's like a 25-year-old woman and she goes and gets an abortion, and then the state is like, no penalty for you, but 99 years for the abortion doctor, that doesn't make any sense. It's a crime. A crime is a crime. You can't just simply say that, that this person's a victim too. No, they have agency. They chose to do the crime. They should also be punished. I don't know. That's like, that would just be challenged and like the court too. I think that would go up to the Supreme Court, like that type of penalty. I don't know how that works, but like this also shows these problems that are happening. And I guarantee you're going to have more of these cases where the liberal media is going to try to find, some young girl who, got raped or, some, messed up situation like we saw in Ohio with these illegal immigrants. She go across the state lines, gets an abortion, and then they like try to prosecute everyone. And, the people try to prosecute everyone involved for this stuff or like violating the abortion exemptions or crossing state lines. And it creates a massive headache. And people are just like, these bills seem to be creating chaos and disorder and, not one uniform law for the country, which, I mean, there's a degree of federalism in America. We are in a federal system, and there maybe, states should make different laws, but it does come as a little weird to people when like you could be doing one thing in one state and you could get a medal for doing it. Your abortion doctor, like, we salute you, abortion doctor, for doing your job. And then say it's like the state of Illinois. And then you go to the next state, you go to, say, Kentucky or Missouri, and the abortion doctor does the same thing, and instead he's facing life in prison. There is not really a modern precedent I can think of where there's such a disparity. There's disparity where somebody's saying, selling like weed or something. And in one state, they get arrested and, maybe could face some time in jail. And in another state, nothing's going to happen to them. There are cases like that. But in a case like this, and it's like a highly charged social issue where people now view abortion as a positive good. And so like an abortion doctor doing their job in one state, could result in life in prison versus another state, the governor gives them a medal. That does create a weird situation. And also you're going to have these problems where they cross state lines, like people cross state lines to do an abortion. What happens in that case? It's not like, and blue states are going to fight over this issue too. So you're going to have blue states and red states fighting over it. The one interesting thing, and it's like an accelerationist thing, it's a happening. It creates a, the necessary division and highlights certain issues, the divisions within America. It's not going to, some people like talking like this could be the root of national divorce. And I don't think so. I don't think people care enough about abortion in the way that they cared about slavery to make that like the dividing line. I think it would just have to be sent back to the Supreme Court, and we don't know what the solution is, but it is going to be a very chaotic situation. And what I think, if they see more stories like this and more of these states bickering over each other, and like one state trying to like punish a child for getting, they would actually not have the. They would not have, most states would know the optics wise and not trying to punish a child for getting an abortion, but maybe punishing the parents or something. And, this creates a weird situation that could alienate a lot more college educated whites, because they could just see this like, why don't they grant the exemptions? Why don't they, why are they trying to prosecute the parents of the abortion doctor for doing something that I actually, believe that should be there? I do believe in the exemptions. And generally people want the exemptions. And a majority of the population is like 65% believe it should be legal. They're open to limitations of like 10 weeks, 6 weeks. Those don't really matter to them as long as it's available, but they also want the exemptions, like the rape and the incest exemptions, or, having no exemptions is very unpopular, as this Alabama bill, where I think only they ask the population, it's like, what do you think about this bill? No exceptions, complete abortion ban, no exemptions. And only 12% of people supported it. And only, I think, even a third of Alabamians actually supported it. So it's like, even in red states, they're like, and like diehard Republican voters think that it's a little too far. And so that could create political problems with that if like the mainstream media decides that this is going to be the #1 issue. The only saving grace of this story is that, I don't want to say saving grace, but the only thing that like Republicans gravitate towards, because they tried to debunk it before and then it turned out to be true, because Biden's like, the 10-year-old cross state lines to do this. This is how dangerous the new abortion or the way we treat abortion is in America, that we have these like chaotic law system that no one knows what's going on. And then it turned out to be true. But it then turned out to be an illegal immigrant doing it, and it's like a messed up situation. It's also where the mother is defending the illegal immigrant who's responsible for this. She's like, oh, no, there's no problem. My daughter is fine. It's like, what? And it's like highlighting like this thing about Hispanic culture that a lot of people don't want, and it's particularly found among illegal immigrants, is that, sexual abuse is just like sky high for a lot of these kids on their families. And it sounds like this guy who did it was like the boyfriend, possibly the boyfriend of the woman, of the mother. I don't know how a mother could defend, a male like raping their 10-year-old daughter, but this woman did, and they were all sticking by him and like, oh, there's no problem here, it just happens. So there's like a toleration for family sexual abuse, which in normal American society that would be horrifying, but in like some other immigrant communities, that's just like, it's just a fact of life. It's just something that happens, and that's how they're treating it with that. And so that's like an interesting story, but that's like the only angle that Republicans could focus on, is like focusing in on like how this guy, illegal immigrant, was able to stay in this country for like 7 or 8 years undetected, committed a horrible crime, one of the worst crimes you could ever commit, and then the illegal immigrant community views it as no big deal, and him as the victim, or at least the family that's most affected by this, and they'll defend the sexual abuse of a minor. And that's like the story to focus on. But I think it's like, wanting to lay the hammer down, as I think the Indiana Attorney General and maybe somebody from Ohio is trying to do as well, where on this case, that's ultimately going to be a political loser among the people. So stuff like that could alienate. So I've always been saying, from my evidence, I was thinking that abortion would not play a major factor in the November elections. It felt like it was losing a lot of steam, like these protests aren't really turning out. I mean, there's still this terror campaign that I predicted. It's not as bad as I thought, or as maybe I thought it could be. But I mean, there's still a lot of vandalism in these pregnancy centers, and, of even some churches and stuff. And like Elizabeth Warren is trying to shut them all down and make them a criminal penalty for having a pregnancy center. I don't know how that works. Just because they're counseling that you don't have an abortion. That's like really messed up that they would suggest this. but they are getting more extreme, and polling does show a difference when it comes to this issue. But it does really highlight the modern America, this like whole rape of a 10-year-old. It's like, this is like America as is now. It's like an illegal immigrant rapes a 10-year-old. They have to cross state lines to get an abortion. They have an abortion. The abortion doctor, wanting, to get virtue signal and become a hero to liberals, like announces it and leaks it to the media. Then Biden like highlights it and propagandizes it, and it's just like and then the only conservative or the main conservative response is just to punish, the people responsible for, technicalities, or things that the majority of American people would support otherwise. And it's just such a weird, it's a real microcosm of modern America that you're seeing with that. Now, going back to Republican focus and what they're talking on, and as I was saying, Youngkin won in part by his opposition, or in large part by his opposition to critical race theory and these insane racial equity admissions plans where are in the lowering of standards, which, is going to hurt kids' ability to go to the colleges they want, or go into the high schools that they want, the competitive high schools they want. And parents felt that this was directly impacting them. And it was like clearly showing that this had effects. Like, this was a political winner. Everyone in 2021 was talking about how critical race theory and that campaigning on it is a political winner for Republicans. But a lot of times, in the New York Times report on their poll showed this, is that there's been less attention paid to critical race theory. And we all know it's still there. There's still reports coming out. Tucker highlights some of them. A lot of conservative media highlights some of these stuff that's happening with critical race theory, anti-white stuff is in education. But the focus have shifted a lot of the people who were, that was their main beat, like Chris Rufo and people like that. And what are they now talking about? Well, they've now switched to, LGBT stuff, and particularly drag queen story hour. And, that is, I think the one reason that riles people up more is that gets way more engagement, because it is more infuriating to see, a drag queen like shake his or her ass. I don't know shake its ass in front of a kid. And I don't know what they would describe their gender pronouns. We'll call them it. It's ass in front of the kids. And, people get mad about this, and they're like, I can't believe this. America's done. Like, the world's going to hell. Like, this stuff. Something must be done about this. And people just, like, obsess over how many drag queen story hours there are. And there's a lot. It's a really disturbing trend. And also they focus on the gender identity stuff, and there's a pretty good examples of that. But the polling is like a little bit different on that stuff. First off, with the drag queen story hour, pretty much all of that is not necessarily taking place in schools. There are a few cases of it taking place in schools. I know that. But most of these are private events hosted by horrible libtard parents. And these people are stupid. You should, maybe assess whether these people should be, raising kids. There's a lot of concerns about that. But at the same time, this is a private event, and, it's the law. It's harder to create a bill to like ban drag queen story hour for like people of a certain age, because, that goes into like private affairs. I mean, you can ban it in schools, obviously, but you can't ban it like a private event or easily enough as you can with critical race theory. Critical race theory, it's like taught by the schools. Those schools are headed by the local and state, governments. Local and state governments can say, we're banning this, and the school board, and you can have get in the school board and demand that you have a different education system. So, there's much more recourse to ban this stuff. While the drag queen story hour, it's generally libtard parents taking their kids to this and messing them up because they're idiots, but you're limited in what you can do with that. It's not necessarily, there are a few cases, I do know there's a few cases of teachers taking kids on a trip to there, or, the teachers trying to influence children on what changing their gender identity. Now, when it comes to school affairs, yes, they can do stuff. And there's pretty good solid support for, banning that type of lessons among elementary schools. But it's surprisingly not that high. I think there was a poll in March saying that there was only 35% of Americans opposed teaching LGBT lessons to elementary schools or elementary students, and it keeps going decreases to middle and high school. And so that's pretty disturbing. That is like 35%. And I don't know what maybe people think that like LGBT lessons, it's not like drag queen story hour or this crazy stuff about how like a 7-year-old should change its gender. They think when they think that like American people think, oh, it's like teaching kids that gay people exist. And that's how they think that is the lesson. And so it's unfortunate that you can't reach those people in the manner that they have. And so I think when it comes to this education issue, a lot of normal middle-class white parents, they may find drag queen story hour ridiculous, but, it's not happening in their schools. And if they just see conservatives and Republicans just like constantly obsessing over drag queen story hour and talking about banning and stuff, they're like, well, these people aren't addressing like the issues that I care about. And when it comes to education, you've got to reach them on the issues that care about them and directly impact them. Now, some of the LGBT lessons, that can directly impact them. If they, send one day their second grader decides that they're, a boy and they're a girl, the parents will be directly impacted by that. But it's the same with CRT stuff. There was always strong majorities opposing critical race theory whenever they pulled that in 2021. But now there's not as much of a focus on that. They've moved on to the LGBT and drag queen stuff. It makes for, the conservative readership definitely is more engaged in that than they are with critical race theory stuff. And it's more exciting to see that. If you compare it to seeing like this drag show and like, strips and stuff, like that's like insane. Like, and people are gonna be like, what the hell is this? Versus, just a report saying like, this is what their textbook is saying about how white people are evil. It's not as exciting and it's not as like, you don't have that visual evidence that's really gonna rile people up and like anger them. And that's why they're going more for the drag queen stuff than the race stuff now. But it's coming at the expense, the base, is getting fired up about that. And like the people who are really dedicated conservative media consumers, and there may be a few like centrists who may be upset about that. But the average parent, they're not coming into contact with that. They're not taking their kid to, drag queen story hour. This is just not their thing. And they just think that they're like focused on something that's like not into their interest. So, the focus on that. And also it's unfortunate. I mean, the conservatives are also going up against greater acceptance of gays and others in American society. 70% of Americans support gay marriage now, which, in my lifetime, is well below 50%. And not too long ago, like 20 years ago, it was well below 50%. California banned gay marriage in 2008. Now it's up to 70%. And people just like don't care about these issues unless it directly impacts them. But Republicans, conservative commentators and media have just switched over to that stuff than talking about critical race theory. And politicians, instead of talking about banning critical race theory and highlighting that and highlighting this, the insane affirmative action policies or these stupid new emission standards where, they're trying to artificially increase racial, numbers, and have racial quotas and they're lowering standards. That stuff is political winner. Everyone talked about how that was a political winner last year and it was an impact in Youngkin. They're instead not focusing on that and moving on to drag queen story hour, which is insane. It is like showing how crazy of a country we are in America, but it's not the political winner that critical race theory is. It's not something that parents view as something that is directly impacting their life. The ones who it's directly impacting are the libtards who are intentionally taking their kids to that and doing it to troll conservatives. And in some ways, maybe that's a kind of a good thing that it's only the people who really want to go and are subjected to this. I mean, I do know there's a couple examples of kids being taken along to that and their parents had no knowledge of it and stuff like that. And there's like crazy other, pornographic novels and stuff that they're reading to elementary school kids. But that stuff, when it comes to schools and directly into schools, parents are getting upset about. But and also a lot of the normal people think that obsessing over that stuff maybe come off as a bit weird. They're like, oh, well, I don't see that. Like, why are they so obsessed with like this pornography and stuff? There are cases of that happening, but I think for a lot of these ordinary parents, they don't see that happening in their schools yet. Now, if it was, there's of course a lot of examples of the drag queen story are, but most of these are private events, and libtards are just getting crazier and crazier. So it's hard. You don't necessarily have a solution for that, and most politicians aren't really suggesting a realistic solution to stopping that. So, and in conclusion, critical race theory and racial quotas in school and ruined standards are winners, but it doesn't appear that Drag Queen Story Hour is the political winner for Republicans as they think it is. But it's a big red meat for a conservative audience, and they seem to care about that more than critical race theory. The final point I want to make about this subject is, the thrill over losing these college-educated whites and saying we don't need this, it does go back to this problem I've identified with the right a lot, is this idea that no one should go to college. You need to drop out of society. You need to just go be a plumber out in the woods, or, have your homestead and not try to make yourself, aspire to elite status in our society. And there is problems with coming to elite status, as I said, the respectability factor, and, a lot of these people are much more liberal than they were, but, these people still control society. It's not going to be plumbers out in Pulaski, Tennessee that are controlling society, or are the real elite, the new elite. And a lot of these arguments, come from the idea that we're just going to have a revolution and we're going to wipe away the whole elite structure, and there will be new people in charge. It'll be the plumbers in charge. They'll know how to operate, a 21st century economy and government and society, and everything will be much better. We'll be on the moon. We'll be on Mars, and in a year after the revolution, all these things are going to come to occur. And it goes into the point of fantasy. And whenever people talk about escaping, I've made this point before, is that, they claim that all these plumbers who, first off, they say that you need to go to trade school because you're not going to go into college. You're not going to accrue all that debt you go from going to college. And you're going to be making six figures. You're going to have a great life. You're going to be out in the rural areas. But at the same time, you're going to be prepared for a revolution. It's why are you going to be involved in a revolution if you're getting paid well, you're having a great life, and you're experiencing no problems out in rural America? That's not how revolutions start. It's not hey, my life is great. It's time to overthrow the government and this whole society that makes my great life possible. That's not how revolutions work. It's there's a famine going on. It's time to overthrow this government. Are these things. And whenever they talk about disasters and stuff that are going to happen, they always say that the people who are non-college educated are going to be insulated from it, while all the college educated people are going to be starving and dying, and terrible things are going to be happening to them. And I don't know about that theory. I don't want to go too much into the hating on the rural versus urban, college educated versus non-college educated discourse. I want to go back to that point. It's it is a major problem for the right to be losing the educated, to be losing the people who are going to be in elite status, because the elites still make decisions. They still determine what goes on TV. They still determine what goes on the radio. They still determine policy. They still determine how our society operates and what is right and what is wrong. And when you lose all institutional control, and you don't have the power to influence society. I mean, this is such an obvious point. A lot of us think that it is oh, well, we'll just have our own little corner of America, and this will eventually take over the country. And that's not how it works. It's when all of the elite has the same beliefs, and they view the dissidents and those who are not accepting it as a danger, they go after them. They want to take them down and destroy them. And they have the power to do so. You may build your own little corner of America. It's free of most of the pause. You're not really experiencing the rest of the culture, and maybe have your kids in your own little school. But the state can one day just decide, this is a threat, we're coming down and ending this. And what's your recourse to that? You're just a little corner of the country against the most powerful empire on the earth. And I mean, maybe you can say this will be the start of a revolution. I don't know how that's going to work out. But losing the elite and having the elite entirely hostile to you, and everyone who gets a college degree, it's not just the elite. It's it's a lot of the young middle class. And these people are going to be around for a very long time. And it's not you're going to have some magical event that, creates a society or situation that's much better for you. This is like going to carry on for years and years, and there's not really a good answer to it besides just pretending that we're going to, there's going to be a collapse or some type of situation occurs and now things are going to be much better for us. There is no real point or real indication that that could happen. I mean, things, some people just think the worse the better, but actually a lot of times the worse is the worst and it just keeps getting worse. And so when it comes to this, like losing these people, we really have to win over like people who are aspiring to elite positions, who are aspiring to be, top tier lawyers and, engineers and doctors. I mean, that's a major problem with doctors. I mean, doctors are now becoming overwhelmingly Asian. Like there is a real dearth of white doctors, and we're even importing doctors from like Africa and elsewhere. And, it's a troubling situation with it. And a lot of these elite and, financiers and stuff, and these people are going to have control of the country. They're going to be making the decisions. They're going to be determining what the culture is. They're going to be determining education policy. They're going to be determining what your kids learn in school. They're going to be determining who gets healthcare and who doesn't. And you don't. And if you just have your own little corner, they might leave you alone, but they're not obligated to leave you alone. They could just come in and take all your stuff if they ever feel like it and ruin everything you've built. And they have that power to do that due to having all the elite institutions. So, and I always say the solution to this issue is not retreating. It's not just going out in the woods and just hoping everything collapses. And then once everything collapses, you can rebuild anew instantly due to the fact you had a cabin out in the woods. Like, I would never argue for this stuff. I mean, when it comes to like difference between trade school and going to college, it's just all aptitude. If you like working with your hands, if you don't like schoolwork, go to trade school. If you're, pretty good with schoolwork, you're not necessarily, maybe manual labor is not something you get really joy out of. You're really good with reading stuff and like being, diligent on this work, then maybe you should go to college. And if you're into politics, like as a high schooler or young, somebody who's in their early 20s, late teens, you probably do well in college because you're already doing something above or something different than your rest of your age cohort, who are generally not into politics and generally can't understand this stuff. So I think that's like important to consider. But I've gone over that many times. I think the main thing is that we do need people who have the ability to influence these things or be a counter elite. And that's always, whenever you look at these systems or like revolutionary moments or change moments, there's always these large group of people who are willing to be a counter elite or to take the reins if there's a change in the situation. This happened in, with the Bolshevik Revolution. This is something you got to remember, is that a lot of the leadership of the Bolsheviks were the most like highly educated, were just like recruited from the college students. Like college students were overrepresented among these radicals. And they, were well educated, had a lot of ambition, were able to, read and like serve as diplomats and stuff. There's a lot of chaos there. I don't necessarily think it's the best example, but they were able to go in that. And a lot of the reasons that these interwar fascist movements took off is that due to the horrible economic situation, that there was all these people who should have been middle-class elites, who should have had great jobs as lawyers or businessmen or whatever, due to the terrible economic situation of interwar Europe and the Great Depression, they were thwarted. And they, turned to political radicalism and other ideas because they thought that the current regime was not going to allow them to advance. One thing that is a real good reason that America will be stable is because it allows these middle-class whites or middle-class people in general to feel that they can advance, and they can achieve the American dream. If that's taken away, you're going to see a lot more of them turn to radicalism in that situation. And, in another case, and I always like to cite this, is the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't just random peasants who were living out in the middle of the woods who then took over. No, it was like a counter elite, primarily situated in the KGB and other institutions of the government, not in the Communist Party. Generally, they were not Communist Party functionaries, as the Communist Party functionaries were generally the ones who, well, there was like some examples of them, but generally a lot of the top tier Communist Party functionaries were not able to move into power status in the new system, they were the ones who were toppled. But people who were, you know, in the army, KGB, intelligence services, other way, you know, are people trying to make a lot of money before it collapsed. Those were the people who took the reins of society. It was not just people living out in the woods and, you know, excluding themselves from the rest of society. So in order to like change society, you have to participate in it, and you have to have people in positions of power and influence to, you know, counteract the terrible decisions that will happen if it's entirely in our enemy's hands. Just look at there's like a new report on how medical schools and, you know, medical licensing boards are now demanding all this woke stuff from people. And they are able to get away with this if they have control of these institutions. So, and this will impact you. You just can't pretend that it's not going to impact you because we're going to make a base medical school or whatever. You know, that's going to take a lot of time and effort. And in the meantime, this is already happening. And when they have control of this stuff and your solution is just like, well, escape, flight. And that's always the conservative response, is escapism. But the only escape is victory. And in order to achieve victory, you have to have people competing for these positions of power and influence in our society, and have a counter elite waiting in the wings in case there is some type of change or collapse or disruption in our society. And there's a group of people who know how to operate the system, who know how to have influence, who have the connections to make, you know, a change and be the new authority figures in that type of change. And so that's always my point. And so that's why it's very disturbing that we're losing college-educated whites. We need to win them back. I do think it is through a mix. You know, a lot of them in there are brainwashed. We do really have to counteract the brainwashing. And some people are just lost that we can never win back over. But we do have to be more attentive to these ideas. And winning over 40% of Hispanics or whatever is not going to make up for losing the college-educated white vote by 20 or 10, you know, percent. So that is my perspective on this, and the college-educated white demographic is not going to disappear anytime soon. So that is a long discussion. You know, that maybe I said this could be a shorter episode, but I've already made a very long discussion on that topic. So I have a few quick subjects I want to discuss before moving along. The one subject I really want to talk about is the case of Tekle Sundberg, who is an adopted Ethiopian man who was killed by police snipers after a standoff where he was shooting into his neighbor's house and just going crazy and shooting people. And they took him out because he was obviously a violent threat to the people around him. So they saw a threat, they saw a guy firing off his gun, and police took action and took him down. Well, this is now being treated as like the new police shooting that is roiling the nation, or is like a terrible atrocity that happened, even though this guy was clearly nearly killed somebody. And there was a case of one of the possible victims of that he had shot into her home during his insanity episode. And they were having a protest. And you have to remember is that the parents of her adopted parents of Tekle are white. But the whole family is like mix and match. Like, this is like a very weird family situation. I think 3 of their kids are biological white, and then they have 5 adopted kids, and most of them are black, but I think 1 is Hispanic. Some others maybe something else. Maybe 2 are Hispanic, but I think like 3 of them are black, and then like at least 1 of them is Hispanic. And they were doing interviews with them, and they're like, "How dare the police shoot him? He's having a mental health crisis. They needed to de-escalate this. Like, why didn't they let us talk to him?" And it's like, they just needed to talk, and we could be having a barbecue with him. And it's like such a bizarre situation. And it appeared that like at least 2 of the adopted kids are gay, and one of the black guys is definitely gay. And then I think the Hispanic son that they interview also might be gay. I don't know with the situation with this. And it's just like a very bizarre family situation that they have. And it's just like, and really the only way they got brought to sense is like a lot of conservatives were sharing this viral video. It's like one of the victims or somebody that Tekle shot into her home during his episode, you know, she confronted protesters, and the protesters were multiracial. Like, there was like whites, there was like goofy white liberals among them, there were blacks, and they were all arguing. And this woman comes out, I'm not quite sure what her race is. Like, she could be Hispanic or are mixed race. It's not clear. She emphasized she has a black child, and she goes off and she's like saying, this is not George Floyd, he was armed, like, you guys are ridiculous. I am a mother to a black son, like, why aren't you accepting my experience? And then the protesters are like, this is not the time and place, you're alive, you should be thankful, like, he's dead, so like the gunshots don't really matter to you. And it's like white liberals arguing with a non-white woman who is a mother to a black child, and I think her husband is black, or definitely black. They appear to be driving in a car, and there's a person on the passenger side, and it's a black man. And I assume that's her husband or boyfriend, whatever. And so they're just like getting in this heated argument, and they're just like, the way they're talking to each other and conversing, and just like both of them are appealing to like the racial dogmas of progressive society that says that you have to, whoever has the most melanin, or not most melanin, whoever is just like the most, is like blacker or more genuine like victim, has the greater moral authority. And she was like saying, I'm the real victim, and also you can't say I'm a racist, or just like I'm white privilege, like I'm a mother to a black child. The fact that she didn't refer to herself as black maybe is an indication she's not black. So I don't know the scenario with this, but this is like a real like America 2022 moment, is the whole Tekle Sundberg. I mean, there's not too much to talk about there. Outside the police shootings that I actually want to make note of. But if you really look at the situation, it's like an adopted Ethiopian child is now 20 years old, goes off on a shooting rampage, holds up and has a standoff with police, and police kill him, and he's still somehow the victim, even though he's actually using his gun and almost killed somebody. And the only way that the pushback is them to find a non-white person to say, hey, I'm a mother of a black son, why don't you listen to my experience and my victimization? And she's arguing that with like white liberals and black women who are just telling her it's not the time, and are lecturing her about how she is being rude and inconsiderate. And even then, I think in an interview she gave with another news outlet, she said that like really the solution should have been that they got a mental health expert to de-escalate the situation rather than shooting him. But she was wanting to just emphasize that, she's the real victim, not Tekle Sundberg, which I think she's right. But it's just interesting how she also appeals to the racial dogmas and progressive thinking of how society is. And like the only way she can have a fully clear voice or clear moral standing is by pointing to her black child and saying that like, this gives me the moral credibility to argue with you because I have a connection to blacks too. And I believe she's like, as I said, she may be mixed race, but the fact she doesn't cite that maybe is she's just she's like some type of Hispanic. So I don't really know the scenario there. Maybe she's like Dominican or something. So it's like an interesting story, a lot of diversity, a lot of like insanity, and this is just how a lot of police shootings are. And now one thing is like, we've always expected like there's going to be like a new George Floyd, and there's always going to be a new George Floyd. And there's like so many cases. There was like the one in Ohio where they shot a guy who had been shooting at officers, and they said like, oh, well, he just discharged his weapon. He wasn't a real threat. And that happened like a few weeks ago. And like they tried to do that, and there was like some protests over it, but there wasn't really much there. There's this case. They've always had a couple different police shooting cases that they try to highlight, but they're not really able to build that up. And it is interesting why it happened. I think that there did have the situation I think we were about to have nationwide riots if Derek Chauvin had been let off. And there was definitely like a lot of tension that day, and you saw the protests, and there was like, they were getting very aggressive and that, and then the verdict was announced, and it seemed to really dissipate the tension and, lower the level of intensity when he was announced as guilty. And that was the reason why they announced guilty, was over fear of over what would happen if they announced a not guilty verdict, over a non-guilty verdict. I don't know why I'm not saying verdict correctly. And they go along with that. And so ever since then, they haven't had that. And there's been a bunch of cases. There's like the woman, the teenage girl who wielded a knife and the cop shot her. And like LeBron James was like, we got to get after this cop. And it's like, no, she was, fine. There was another case where a cop shot a guy who, they were fighting over a taser, and he was fighting over the ground, and he shot him. And there were protests over that, but it hasn't gone to riot mode, and they arrested the guy. And so it is interesting why the police shootings are not turning into another Floyd episodes. So there's a question of like why this is happening. Is it because the media is not giving it enough attention? But the media does give it a pretty good amount of attention. They do give these attention to these cases. I mean, there was even the one in a nearby town outside of Minneapolis, a suburb of Minneapolis, where they shot a guy, and that was around the time of the Floyd verdict or the Chauvin verdict. You know, there was a ton of attention paid to that. There's always a ton of attention paid to this stuff. It's not like they're completely ignoring it. So I don't think it's like intentionally trying to fail that. I just think that there may be that a lot of the Floyd stuff had been tension that had been building up over the COVID lockdowns and over, you know, all the situations that have been happening in spring and this disruption of people's lives. And it all got transferred into Floyd and rioting and just like mass demonstrations. And it was like a mass psychosis that had happened of people. And there may be not the cases of that to happen now. Now, these police shootings can always get set off. There can always be returned to having a mass violence. It's just like you can't really predict what cases are going to be like that. One reason there's like less maybe cases for the rioting is that the rioters know that they're more likely to charge cops now than they were pre-Floyd and charge them with the heaviest murder sentences than they would. And, you know, there's been some cops who've gotten off for shootings, but the way that they're going about this, I think that maybe the people who are outside agitators know to not do this. And also maybe they're worried that, you know, that a lot of their friends are now involved in the Department of Justice and have their roles there, that they're not, you know, they don't want to upset the powers that be too much. I think there was also a lot of the reason that there was a lot of rioting is that I think some really powerful forces in society were, you know, funding these Antifa types to go out and agitate. And there was tons of examples of this in order to create chaos and to be a potential revolutionary force, our ground troops, if they were trying to overthrow Trump and to create those conditions. And I think like there was like kind of a mini coup when the riots happened because, you know, Trump wanted to use the military and the military told him no. And Trump realized that he didn't have that many loyal people to him who would stand by him. And like Bill Barr had to find assorted people from throughout the federal government to serve as federal marshals, from prison guards to border patrol, and ship them up to DC to protect the president from getting overthrown by like Antifa, BLM, and their military allies and intelligence allies. And like the FBI kneeled for them. So he couldn't control like this government. And I think that was also part is like anti-Trump animus as like anti-Trump sentiment was fueling it, and just like outrage and frustration with the COVID lockdowns. And they're about to ease the COVID lockdowns, and just this incident happened, and it was just you know, America really venting for an entire summer. This stuff can return. I don't think it's necessarily like the Democrats can like dictate what happens, you know, with this. I mean, you have to remember is that a lot of the Black Lives Matter riots in, you know, 2014, 2015, you know, Baltimore, Ferguson, elsewhere, that all occurred on Obama's watch. And, you know, people say like this is a political tool for Democrats. But I mean, and there was a bunch of riots in 2016 over just like any police shooting, they would have a riot over that. And like 3 successive months. I know there was one in Charlotte. There was one in Milwaukee, I think, or somewhere in Wisconsin. And there was another place too where there was like a mass rioting. I think, and it was like all 3 months leading up to the election, there was rioting. And there was also the Dallas police shooting, police assassination. There was like always these types of disturbances happening in 2016. And then Trump came in and we didn't see any of that up until Floyd. And so people like thought that like, oh, you know, Trump's there and they know that they can't get away with this stuff. And then with Trump, we had the worst rioting in American history in terms of damage caused. It was all over the place. And now we have, you know, Biden in place and they're just not happening. But I don't necessarily think it's like direct political control. It's just like you don't know how the crowds are going to operate and what they're going to do. And maybe that a lot of those elements who are there are maybe just more focused on crime and are realizing that maybe they don't have as many frustrations with police as they did, you know, in 2020 because, you know, now under post-Floyd revolution, they don't enforce any laws, and a lot of these guys get away with tons of crimes that they're committing anyway. So there's a permissive attitude, and instead of rioting, they're just going to focus on carjacking or shooting each other. So there's a lot of considerations there, and I think the Antifa agitators also are worried that DOJ and others, if they actually do act out of line, that they may go after them as a political way of gaining votes in elections. They may do that, and so maybe the Antifa agitators are more hesitant to try to stir up things. So that's my thoughts on that. Now time for the cognitive elite questions. And I thought this would be a shorter episode, but it's actually turned out to be about the standard time. We're about an hour and 5 minutes into here, and we've got 2 quick cognitive elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the cognitive elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements. They're guaranteed to boost your intelligence and height as well. So make sure you sign up for them. People love them. They just love them. They're highly rated. So we're going to the first 2. The first one is really quick. This one comes from Tony. He asked, he asked this question in the comments. So he asked, and I just decided to answer it through the show on one of the latest episodes on abolition, which you should sign up to listen to. He said, have you ever explained how you got into the dissident right scene when you became aware of the relevant facts? And I told, recently I told about how I became aware of the relevant facts and got into this stuff a few weeks ago. So I don't want to belabor that point, but I don't know if I explained how I got into the dissident right scene directly. And what happened there is that there was a podcast on the old alternativeright.com in spring 2010. Maybe this is May 2010. So this is a long time ago, 12 years ago. I'm outing myself as an old head here. And I was in college, and I was already reading Alternative Right all the time. But I didn't realize there were any groups into this. And Richard Spencer and Kevin Deanna did this podcast together. And Kevin Deanna's been a long-time guy in Dissident Right. We've had him on the podcast, our IQ supplements before, under a pseudonym, James Kirkpatrick. He's got a bunch of different ones that he's already been outed, so I'm not doxing him. So they did a podcast on the Youth for Western Civilization, which was the group that Kevin Deanna was running. I was like, wow, this group sounds awesome. I got to join it. And then sent an email to YWC in the summer of 2010, got linked up with people, and that's how I got into the scene. I never had a formal YWC chapter because it was difficult to find a academic advisor for the group. And anyway, the group shut down and after the fall of 2011. And also there was the one person who's doing anything made it much more toxic than it should have been. It was a fairly, it's trying to, be on the edge between dissident right and conservatism. And then somebody took it all the way into the alt-right after in the fall 2011. It was a new member. So I was just focused on the fraternity at the time. So I was I don't have the time to do this as well. And so I just focused on that. But I still kept in touch with a lot of those guys. And that's how we got into, mainstream conservatism, politics. And so that's my story. That's a really quick question. So I'll go on to the second one. And in case I didn't name that person who said they came from Tony. So I just want to make sure I got the name in there. It was Tony. Gotta have the name. Probably a pseudonym, but who cares? That's who we got. And now on to the second question. This comes from Dave, and this is a two-parter. He said, with Trump likely to announce a run for president soonish, is there a crop of candidates with the hubris to take him on in the primary? And the second one is, what can we expect as a change in the media landscape when Trump announces? Any prediction for the fallout? Well, with the hubris to take him on, it seems like there's a lot more. The people I'm guaranteed is the people who are anti-Trump. So I could see Larry Hogan. Larry Hogan, I would guarantee is going to run. Chris Christie, for some reason, is going to run. He's already said on this. I think Mike Pence is going to run. And those are the 3 I'm most confident in. And Tom Cotton appears willing to run, and that's just a terrible idea. So there seems to be more people who, in 2021, all these people are if Trump runs, I'm not going to run. And now all these people are saying, if Trump runs, I'm still going to run. Tom Cotton has been telling people that. I mean, Larry Hogan wants to run against Trump. And there could be some other moderates too. I mean, Liz Cheney, I think they're going to there's so many of these like never Trump types. I think they're just going to solidify around one candidate. Could be Larry Hogan, could be Mitt Romney, maybe even Liz Cheney. Who knows? So I think they'll solidify around one candidate. I don't think there's going to be like, like 7 people running, like Adam Kinzinger, Ben Sass, Romney, Liz Cheney, all these people wanting to run in the anti-Trump lane. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it'll be maybe 1 or 2, a few, and they'll eventually rally around one candidate as their preferred choice. Chris Christie just wants to run. That's going to be a disaster. Nobody wanted to vote for him in 2016. His star is long done. He's just not going to go anywhere. And then there's the ones who are wanting to be Trumpists without Trump. Tom Cotton seems likely to run, and seems eager to run. He's been planning this since like I think like 2019. Like for a long time, he's been planning to like a run for president by going around to these like states and like preparing like a run for 2024. And he may just go along with it because he's got like donors telling him to do this. So those are the 4 that I see likely, and there's like so many others that may have the the hubris to do this. There's some people I know who aren't going to run if Trump runs. Like Ted Cruz probably won't run. I don't think Greg Abbott will run if Trump runs. And also I forgot, like Pence is like, those are the 5 I would say with that. And that number could exceed about how many never Trumpers want to run against Trump. So, Larry Hogan, Pence, Tom Cotton, maybe Liz Cheney. Pompeo keeps insisting he's going to run against Trump, but I don't know how true that is, especially with Pompeo knowing he could be a possible running mate to Trump. I don't know if he would do that, but he's also eager. He's like Tom Cotton. They're like already set on running for 2024, no matter what Trump does. Then there's the people who want to run in the Trumpist category would be running for conservative. And some of those are like that, like Pompeo, Pence, and others. But they would be running as a repudiation of Trump in regards. But there's those who will just like say, we're the truer Trump. I think there's like a bunch of people who are not going to run if he does. I don't think Cruz, I said Cruz, Hawley, Greg Abbott. Those are like some of the big names I could think of off the top of my head. Youngkin could run. Youngkin is actually a possibility. It depends on polling. I don't think he's that much of a risk taker. I don't think he's that much of a gambler. I think if he saw the polling, he'd just like, okay, I'm not doing this. So I think if he saw the polling and how he's doing, he's just not going to get involved. And he'll just maybe wait till 2028. And so those are some of the names I would think out there that would run. And some of them maybe there may be some vanity candidates like Kinzinger, who just wants more public attention. Ben Sass, who just wants more public attention. Some of them just don't want to do that because they don't want to alienate the party base and they know they're not going to win. Now, the big question mark comes with, and also another name, I keep thinking of names like Nikki Haley seems eager to run, but she's like promised that she doesn't want to run against Trump. She would get demolished. Like all these people would get demolished. The only real question mark is DeSantis, which I always think that Trump would ruin DeSantis and it would destroy DeSantis' career. DeSantis is the big question mark. I think DeSantis is not going to run. I don't think DeSantis is that much of a gambler. I don't think he wants to risk his political career by running against Trump and losing against Trump, because his political career, his hopes to be president are over if Trump destroys him in the 2024 primary. Because first off, Trump's going to have a long-time grudge against him. And Trump is still going to be popular among a large percentage of the Republican electorate. And if like DeSantis wants to run in 2028 and Trump is like anyone but DeSantis, that's really going to hurt DeSantis. And DeSantis would lose against Trump. I think it's like due to the charisma factor, the fact that he imitates Trump in all his mannerisms and like how the way he talks. I don't think, and I think DeSantis is a smart guy. He realizes this. He realizes that Trump is way more charismatic than him, has way more control of the Republican base, and is just going to destroy him in debates. And DeSantis does not have a high enough support to topple Trump in that election. So but that's still a question mark. I think Trump is worried about DeSantis run, but he would still beat him. It's still not, be it'd still be a battle that he doesn't want to have. He does. I think he wants a primary challenger, but he wants them to be like easy. I still think DeSantis would be not as difficult as a challenger, not as competitive as a challenger as a lot of people think when it comes down to it. Due to his like charisma factor and the fact that he imitates all of Trump's mannerisms and how he talks and uses his hands. I just think that people are going to recognize this, and Trump's going to point this out, and this is going to make him lower in the polls. And a lot of the presidential politics or primaries is about personality, not so much policy. That's something to keep in mind. But there's going to be a fair number of Republicans. I think you'll see at least five serious candidates who run. And I think Pence, I would bet on Pence. I would bet on Christie. I would bet on Larry Hogan. I would bet on, I don't know if I'd bet on Tom Cotton. I don't know if I'd bet on Pompeo. I don't know if I would bet on, Kinzinger or Liz Cheney or Mitt Romney. I'd actually probably bet on Mitt Romney, to be honest with you. I would bet on Mitt Romney wants to be president, and he wants to challenge Trump and say he can beat him. I would bet money on Romney, but I would think you would see, I don't know if Chris Christie would count as a serious challenger, but I think that you would have at least 5 other candidates on a debate stage with Trump during the primary. So I would say at least 5. It could be as many as 10. I don't think, but there's some people I would bet on not running, like Hawley, Cruz, Greg Abbott if Trump ran. There's some people who want to run, but they don't want to run against Trump. And I don't know if I would bet on DeSantis not running. That I'm a very cautious gambler. So here, maybe I'm like DeSantis. That is the big question mark. I think everyone knows that. I still think he won't run. I don't know if I would bet on that. So that's my thoughts on the first question. Now, the second question, how is that going to change the media landscape? Trump will be more in the news. Trump will definitely be more in the news. They'll have to cover his rallies again. They'll give them the live coverage. He might be able to be allowed on social media again. Well, a lot of this is depending on how the Elon Musk deal goes down. And maybe if Facebook allows him on because he's a presidential candidate. There's going to be, in the immediate time, I don't think it's going to change that much in 2022 throughout this year, because it appears he was planning to announce it before the midterms. So he could announce like maybe this month, maybe right before the midterms. It doesn't know. It appears likely he's going to announce before the midterms, at least, and it appears by at least the beginning of the year. And I don't think the change will really happen until there's more of a campaign trail. I do think that CNN and all these mainstream outlets are going to turn every primary challenger into a respectable hero, the hero we deserve. They'll love Mike Pence. They'll love Chris Christie. They'll like how the party's trying to get away from Trump, and the mainstream media will tout these people. And if DeSantis doesn't run, conservative media is going to try to find someone to support. I don't know who that person would be. I would say if Pompeo runs, maybe it would be Pompeo. It's not going to be Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton just doesn't have the charisma to really excite people. I don't know who it would be and it's be divided. Like, I don't know who a lot of these like Federalist types who, are now becoming more conservative, maybe say stuff about January 6th, but it's like Trump's time is over, who they would support outside of it. I could see National Review types supporting Pence. And those people who are like never Trump or anti-Trump, those type of people, I think a lot of them would turn to Pence. But for like populist types, I don't know who they would pick. I don't know who they would go because they're all like expecting DeSantis. Maybe they would go for Cotton. They would definitely not go for any like full-on anti-Trump people like Liz Cheney, Hogan, or Romney. So I don't know who they would back. I think a lot of the populist types would slink back to Trump. And then Conservative Inc., the same outlets that opposed Trump in 2016 will find someone to support in 2024, but it'll be divided. I mean, only if DeSantis runs will there be united support for somebody from conservative media. From both Populist Inc. and Conservative Inc., they will all be behind DeSantis 100%, and then they will be devastated when Trump wins. So those are my predictions about the what it will look like when Trump gets in. We'll see what happens. And so my final prediction is there will be at least 5 challengers against Trump, serious challengers, and 5 people who will be on the debate stage with Trump. And so that's a good number. I think that'll be the case. So there could be more. I actually am leaning towards more, but how many more? That's a question. I don't think there will be 16 people on a debate stage like in 2016 or how they tried to do in 2016. But who knows? I don't think that's likely. I think most 10. So we'll see. But with that, that's all we have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. We're going to have another incredible IQ supplement later this week and a great, terrific, highly respected normal episode next Monday. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.